on Garfie, Volume 1, Creation and Civilization. Since time immemorial, humanity has had a deep connection with other animals. Dogs have long been known as man's best friend, and cats were quite literally worshipped in ancient Egypt. What has been too seldom considered is that the universe as we know it may have been made by and for members of a so-called lower species. Under such a paradigm, we as humans were intended to serve a lower species rather than the other way around, that all other species were intended for the service of humanity. This is the core of the Nermalian theological school of Garfieism, that the Grand Lord Garfield, henceforth referred to as Garfie, as called by his loyal disciples, created our world explicitly for the utility of the feline species. Above all, man's purpose, then, is to serve mates, members asserting themselves to the elegant species in Nermalian nomenclature, with this being the only true way to serve Garfie. By examining the early history of Garfie, and yes, the world which he has crafted, it shall be conclusively proven that first and foremost, our purpose is to serve Garfie and his mates, and that the institutions which undergird our lives are fundamentally Garfieist in origin. A universe of mates. In the beginning were the mates, and the mates were with Garfie. And the mates were Garfie. In their ethereal ways, they alone brought balance to the universe, managing the physical state of matter to a T. Garfie, though, wanted more from his existence, and his ambition found ultimate expression in a project built on Earth, the ecosystem. Just like the physical world, the mates managed and directed the ecosystem to create balance and develop its complexity further via evolution. What differentiated this from the physical world is that the mates directly participated in the ecosystem, inhabiting the most elegant and enlightened species of them all, what modern humans know as house cats.
When people first learn about Garfieism, they must always struggle to understand the distinction between Garfie and his mates. Is Garfie just one of the most powerful mates? I'm often asked. No, that's not the case at all, of course. The analogy which I like to use to convey the concept is that of the human body. All of us have millions of semi-autonomous cells which allow us to survive and thrive, but our consciousness is not equivalent or attributable to any of those cells. That's the closest parallel we can draw to the relationship between Garfie and his mates. Mates are semi-autonomous beings who manage the ecosystem in the physical world, while Garfie is their hive mind, the rational actor, if you will. Just like with a human in their cells, so as long as the mates survive and thrive, Garfie will live on in perpetuity.
On occasion, their development of the ecosystem grew inexplicably out of balance, requiring a more drastic intervention than a mere evolutionary shift. In the late Cretaceous period, the acute and accelerating dominance of the dinosaurs threw the ecosystem out of balance to such an extent that it became unacceptable to Garfie. And seeing as more tried and true methods had failed to bring balance, he used his mastery of the physical world to send a meteor slamming into Earth, causing mass extinction and a virtual biological reset. Eons later, with the rise of humans and our systematic destruction of the world's macrofauna, Garfie faced another such dilemma over how to bring balance. But in us, Garfie saw something he had never seen before: the potential for an existence of perpetual luxury for mate's kind. Garfie's contract and the birth of Garfieism. At this point, Garfie struck up an eminently fair deal with humanity. Humans must dedicate their surplus production to the benefit of mates, and in return, Garfie would ensure the continued health of the ecosystem, despite humanity's overwhelming dominance. This is what mammalian theologians refer to as Garfie's contract, an official, structured symbiotic relationship governing interactions between humans and mates. At first, this was developed in a relatively subtle, tentative de facto basis, with mates merely befriending human tribes and mooching off of their excess food. Seeing as this was such a great success, Garfie decided to move this experiment to the next level by giving humans agriculture and establishing the state with himself as its leader.
Those who are new to Garfieism always seem to take issue with Garfie's contract. It's unfair, they proclaim. Garfie is exploiting us. It is often said. There are two important matters which people need to understand before they can grasp the true justice of Garfie's contract. Firstly, without mates, we will perish. It isn't simply that mates will destroy us. Instead, both the ecosystem and the physical world will collapse with their active intervention. Secondly, the imbalance of the ecosystem actively hurts Garfie. It's only a life luxury which can make up for the extreme pain we inflict.
The first Garfieist civilization. When it comes to the development of agriculture in the state, humanist historians have cultivated a farce non-intuitive and fantastical enough to distract from the obvious reality of Garfie's divine intervention. Such humanist historians will claim that both agriculture and the state arose spontaneously and independently throughout the world, nearly simultaneously. But the truth is that approximately 12,000 years ago, Garfie established his agricultural state-based civilization along the Nile River, and quickly expanded it to unite humanity throughout the Afro-Eurasian landmass. Humanity and mates alike prospered under this natural order, with Garfie and his mates ruling from on high for thousands of years. But by 7001 GA, 7,000 years after the first Garfieist ascendancy, men grew jealous of the just power wielded by Garfie and sought to capture it for themselves. This was when men rebelled and committed atrocities against mates' kind before attempting to retake the reins of Ceesjhay. This was when man rebelled and committed atrocities against mates' kind before attempting to take the reins of the civilized state apparatus which Garfie had created. Without the skill and the glory of Garfie's rule, though. Without the skill and glory of Garfie's rule, though. Without the skill and glory of Garfie's rule, though, the state fractured into an uncountable number of now disconnected societies. Human unity under Garfie was, seemingly, irrevocably lost.
The first civilization, like those after it, was entirely structured around giving glory to Garfie. What made this civilization unique is how, following their coup, they attempted to scrub their society of any remainder of its existence. This went well beyond elaborate myth-making culture of ignorance, which characterized subsequent civilizational transitions, extending into total retrofitting or destruction of everything that made their civilization what it was. In Egypt, this involved desecration, robbing, and burial of Garfie's pyramids, leaving their glorious remains to be discovered millennia later. This also involved the Garfie Splinix being retrofitted from a sculpture of Garfie into a grotesque non-mate hybrid. This is why successors of the first civilization worry so dramatically, though. They essentially destroyed themselves and rebuilt from a blank slate. However, it must be stressed that despite best efforts of early humanist elites, Garfie's influence on sedentary civilization cannot be completely erased. The central institutions were necessary for sedentary civilization, architectural production, and the state, were inventions of Garfie, so humanity had to choose between leaving any semblance of a civilized existence and maintaining some basic Garfieist institutions.
Garfie's conviction, and humanity's 9 lives. At this point, Garfie was left with a simple binary choice: to give humanity another chance to accept his rule, or to annihilate their species forever. In all his internal wisdom, Garfie proclaimed a more complete decision. Mankind, he decided, had 9 chances to accept his rule, giving rise to the idiom that mates have 9 lives, before facing destruction. Their first chance had already been just soiled. Humanity would have 8 more chances to embrace the natural order before the apocalypse ensued. The second Garfieist civilization. After humanity deposed Garfie as the ruler of the first civilization, the collapse of this glorious civilization was not restricted to mere fracturing, whereby, for instance, Mesopotamia was disconnected from the people of the Yellow River in every sense of the word, in terms of state control, culture, linguistics, etc. In addition to this, some groups fell out of agricultural civilization entirely. The people of the Eurasian steppe abandoned agricultural subsistence and gradually adapted to a life of herding livestock. It was a group among these, the Aryans, who Garfie chose as the basis of his second civilization. He gave this group the gift of the horse-drawn chariot and led them on an invasion of the Indian subcontinent and the fractured remains of the first civilization which existed therein, especially those concentrated along the Indus River. The conquest of the subcontinent was swift, ushering in the second Garfieist civilization after approximately 7801 GA, beginning 2 GA, the year of the second Garfieist ascendancy. Upon deposing the degenerate men who had attempted to take the mate's place in the hierarchy, Garfie had to re-establish a strict hierarchy which might guarantee that Garfie and his mates are kept at the top, as is the natural order. This was when Garfie invaded the caste system, with Garfie and his mates at the top, below whom were the Aryans, the protectors of the mates, below whom were the descendants of the people of the first civilization in India. Meanwhile, the descendants of those who attempted to take the place of the mates were ousted, occupying no place in the caste system. Humanity and mates alike once again prospered under the enlightened rule of Garfie, but the Aryans grew jealous of Garfie's power. In 1402 GA, the Aryans not only overthrew Garfie, but also corrupted the caste system for their own purposes. This involved elevating themselves to the position of Garfie and his mates, bringing in the traitors of the first civilization to serve as their protectors, and dividing the commoners into 2 separate castes. In addition to this, they instituted an entire new religion, Hinduism, to replace Garfieism as the glue holding the civilization together. Because of these efforts, the Aryans' traitorous coup was not quite as much of a catastrophe for the second civilization as humanity's first coup had been for the first. This being the case, the second civilization did not give way to sudden collapse, but the order which they put in place and maintained for a time was starkly artificial in contrast to the pure natural order upheld by Garfie, causing gradual civilizational decline and a miserable populace giving way to fracturing as the centuries progressed.
One cannot avoid the conclusion that Indian civilization is an outgrowth of Garfie's tradition, even if one chooses to deny the absolute truth of Jim Davis' revelation. A good example of this, which I like to use, lies with the word Brahma, the chief god and creator within Hinduism. This word comes directly from Grafi, a bastardization of Garfi, Another derivative of this bastardization of our Lord's name is Brahmin, the highest caste and supposed force of order. It's common to see this and wonder why the successors of the first civilization do not possess such obvious evidence of Garfie's influence. What is clear is that the Aryans learned a lot from the debacle of the first civilization's collapse after Garfie was deposed, so they were willing to tolerate certain linguistic, religious, social, and political continuities so long as it served the end of order. Interestingly, one faction within the Aryans, known as the Anglos, fought aggressively to continue to use Garfie's terminology and institutions unabashedly, arguing that this both furthered order and offended Garfie. This is why modern English is chock full of Garfie's lingo. The Anglos would go on to become one of the greatest civilizational opponents which Garfie would encounter.
Conclusion. As has been thoroughly explored the history of humanity, the world in which we live, and the institutions which define our civilized existence are riddled with divine intervention from the Grand Lord Garfield. Humanity in turn has continually spat upon Garfie and has sought to erase all evidence of his influence. But as quickly became apparent, the institutions which Garfie established were integral both to our civilized survival and flourishing. The obvious truth of the matters is that human interests are directly aligned with those of Garfie. But although humanity continually learned from our repeated mistakes, we chose not to absorb the central reality, and by doing so, have chosen to doom ourselves.
Be ye a gamer who would like to further contribute to the construction of the Druidic Church and the grander struggle for Garfie, go over to my Patreon at patreon.com/Ceesjhay, as you see it on the screen right now. The Druidic Church hopes you have enjoyed this program.